You know, it's funny, guys, recording Poker Inferno because some people's mics and connections are better than others. And today was on the lower end of the mic connection quality from the student Joe. Definitely passable, and loads of cool spots came up. Really, really fun session with some awesome coaching opportunities. But it did remind me of a student I coached about 4 years ago or something, probably back in the days when I was using Skype. And this guy had like the worst connection I've ever heard in my life. And I would actually get really anxious before the session because this is what it was like. Oh, hey man, how you doing today? How's your poker game going?
I I poker tracker for pocket jacks.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that about? Poker tracker for? See, by like 5 hours into that coaching package, I actually just wanted to die. And I will never work with a student like that again. And I'd forgotten about it for years, and now I've remembered about it. And that guy has just ruined the rest of my evening, because now I'm going to be thinking about his god-awful connection in mic, whatever it was. It's a bloody disgrace. And let's get to the video. Okay, so we are back, guys, with episode number 7 of Poker Inferno. Joe, how's it going, my friend? Welcome to Poker Inferno. How are you feeling about today's session?
Terrified, but happy and looking forward to getting into it.
Terrified but happy and looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a good mix of emotions. So tell us a little bit about what stakes you normally play.
So playing 25NL pretty much predominantly at the minute. Switching between sites, playing on 888 today.
Yeah, this is the old easty grazing ground, so I'm hoping we can catch the animal in its natural habitat and hunt it today, but maybe not. He's probably playing 10NL or something. So let's sit in, see what we can do.
Happy to see bet the king here. Quite a lot you can have there, plus draws, straight draws, king x, 8x, possibly 7x and middle and pairs. So just going to check and see. He gets a bit trigger happy with bluffs. Quite big. This could still be straight draws, flush draws. Obviously, it could definitely be beat with worse king x, but I'm not going to be folding. Pretty much everything brick, so I'm going to check call the river too. King x.
Cool. Let's talk about this one then as our first hand. Okay, so we see bet the flop here. So my first question actually about just flop before we get to that is like, are you playing like a range bet strategy? Are you playing some checks here? Like, what's your general approach to blind versus blind on a board like this?
Yeah, I'll definitely play some checks, yeah. I've gone through the Tree series, so I'm quite thingy with the exploitative framework for blind versus blind. So I think with the king here, I'm definitely going to be c-betting, but if I had, say, like a monster, probably check it, go for a check raise, but just with the weak king, I'm happy to c-bet.
Yeah, okay, so the way I would maybe adapt that is I would say that medium strength hands are fine to check call with, like in both in theory. Like if you are playing checks on this board, then king deuce should be checking some of the time. In theory, in practice, if you're building like a more exploitative thought process for playing against the pool, I still think checking with a hand like this is totally fine. The sort of hands I would like really want to bet against pool here would just be hands that have a little bit going on, but you don't really want to face a stab with them. Like bluffs like Jack, I don't know, Jack 6 or something like that, you know, Queen 5, these kind of hands, I probably like defer to betting, especially with the backdoor. And then I think with your more medium stuff, like a weak top pair, you can check call this hand. You can bet this hand, it doesn't really matter. But certainly not like a mandatory bet. On the turn, so here, I just want to like coach the way you're thinking about this spot right out the gate here. So you're saying I'm going to check because there's a lot of draws that he could get trigger happy with. Now, these draws do also invest if you bet, right? So if you were to pick like a
Yeah, true.
normal bet size here, a lot of them are also calling. So it's not like your argument for checking the turn isn't actually a sufficient argument for like checking being the best play. I just want to point that out because what you're saying is also true in theory.
Yeah.
And in theory, you can go for a check here, you can go for a bet here. So if you're trying to figure out, in true EV style, like you're saying, is it better against this pool to bet this hand or is it better to check this hand? I would just kind of ask, like, how do you think they're going to play against a check here in general? How are they going to play against the bet? And if you're not sure, then again, either line can be okay. I might get the sense that like a lot of the hands they're calling with here are the same hands they're bluffing with if you check, and I don't think there's going to be a big difference here between the EV of checking or betting. I think both are okay. And then I like your plan to go ahead and check call the river. I do think it's very likely that people are not value betting thinly enough on river and are probably over bluffing just based on how many bluffs they'll land with in this spot. But yeah, I think I agree with check call being the right play on the river as played. But yeah, I'm just going to be getting at this from a coaching standpoint, trying to say when you give an argument for a play, I'm going to be questioning whether that argument's truly sufficient or whether you should be a bit more like on the fence about whether both plays could be okay and whether you can truly choose between them, right? Because we can always cite an argument for a play. That doesn't mean that that's a sufficient argument that makes that play better than the other line.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. And the final thing I'd just say about turn is try to decide like what your toolkit is here. Like if you're just using one size, what's that size? For example, if you were playing overbet here, which is a really good size in theory, then you would just check king deuce. Whereas if you were playing block and overbet, then you could alternate between like blocking and checking king deuce. So you're just trying to like decide what your toolkit is first and then decide where your hand would fit into that. I think that just keeps your decision nice and streamlined.
Yeah, that makes sense. Probably 3-bet or call here. I'm going to go with 3-bet unless IMH gets involved. Against the 13 big blind stack.
Okay, Joe, so why did the cold call from this short stack put you off entering this pot? Just talk me through that.
Just purely for how small this stack is. I think I'd be squeezing to sort of 14, 15 big blind, so I suppose we'll be putting them all in, so wouldn't really make much difference either way.
What do you think?
If you had about 15 big blinds.
What do you think his range is on average?
Suited broadways, potentially not even just unsuited broadways, pocket pairs, suited connectors, weak merged sort of range.
Would it be fair to say that it could contain like 9-7 suited or ace-5 off or something?
Yeah,
as well?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I actually see this as an incentive to be in the hand. Like king queen off is pretty clear, I think, as a 3-bet against under the gun in this pool because the 3-bet node is just a lot better than normal. Human versus human in position is just a very, very good spot for the in-position human. I go on about this all the time in these videos. When this guy comes along, I actually think that you can still just squeeze because getting it in for that many big blinds against that random short stack range, like I don't think you're ever going to be in terrible shape with king queen. I think it's very unlikely that they're going to have ace queen, ace king, kings, queens, aces here. So I think you're usually just going to be like flipping slightly behind, slightly ahead, something like that. And if you do squeeze here, I think there's a decent amount of fold equity. The other option is just a cold call, but my instinct is that range is so weak and such dead money that actually like some investment from you is better than not investing. And I think you put like a concern about the neatness of the SPR or something before like EV in this consideration. Actually, I think I would have spent more time really thinking about what that range is that's put that dead money into the pot and what that means for you.
I'm happy to just check this hand with the gut shot. Add top pair, really. It's definitely going to be calling this, but this could be definitely some better jack X, but could be, again, pretty much any two cards. And I'm happy to just check back the river, I think. Potentially go for some thin value, but I do think, yeah, got a bit of time.
Yeah, Joe. So when you're hand reading, I think like working on how specific / vague you are with what you say about your opponent's ranges is key. And here you're saying things like could be a better jack, could be any two. And I think that's a bit too vague because the chances of it being any two, like the frequency here of it being 6-4 and the frequency of it being 8-9, you know, are very different. Like there are way more villains that
Yeah.
will randomly lead with 8-9 than with 6-4. So I think like I think you're on the right track here with your hand reading, but I would just kind of say it's going to be a mergy range that contains mediocre hands that I beat, hands that beat me, some bluffs, and the occasional random spew. But, you know, that's a bit more accurate than just saying it could be anything, right? There is some definition here on
Yeah, yeah.
average, and it's a clear call, but it's good to just map out that range as to like what it's going to be on average, and you don't have to commit to like, you know, absolutes about it. Could be any two cards or whatever. You can just sort of roughly describe what the average range will be. On the river, yeah, I agree. I think it's too thin to value bet the river here. A lot of people are snap checking a jack when queen comes on the river, and I do expect like king jack, ace jack to be in here pretty often, and you still have to get called by worse as well. So you could get greedy and make like a third pot value bet here. It wouldn't be ridiculous, but I think check is probably best.
I think it's probably close. You can probably call or fold. Happy to play a 3-bet pot in position in this pool, though, so we'll call. That's pretty horrendous. I think if he leads, I'm just gonna fold. Maybe not for that, so it's again, I think I just call or fold. I will call. Any bigger size, and I will just see with the check back. I think I'm happy to just check back again. It would be like queens, jacks, tens, definitely. I don't think he'd check. I don't think he'd bet that small with the king or an ace and then check. I could start turning nines into a bluff here. Which he will could be slow playing, but I think this tiny bit on the flop coupled with the check on the turn, I don't think he's going to be slow playing too often. And then, yeah, I don't think I'm ever folding if he's got an ace. I don't think I'm going to be able to fold that. If he's called the queens and jacks again, I don't think he's going to fold them now. So, big ace nine.
Please. So we call the 3-bet here with nines. Flop is king, king, ace. I really like your plan to fold to like a normal sizing here, but I think people way over continue the pocket pair region in general in spots like this. Against this 8th pot c-bet though, I do think nines is a call in these positions because villain is likely betting range. Could have 6s, 7s, 8s, you know, hands that you crush. I think turn will probably be underbluffed in this pool as well, so you'll just over realize. And there might be some cool options later, like turning your hand into a bluff sometimes. Villain checks the turn, and you go into sort of one and done big bet mode here on the turn. And I would just say, is this the optimal sizing if you're going to do that? I don't know that it is. Like, if you're going to just bet once here and give up, I might just bet a bit smaller. And, you know, I think it's job done against queens, jacks, tens if you bet a bit smaller than this. And I don't think there's any fold equity against an ace for any sizing. I thought you were a bit too absolute here with your hand reading when you said that you wouldn't expect villain to check an ace on the turn. I think it's fairly common that people check an ace on the turn here. I don't think it's like always the case, but it can definitely happen. So, you know, don't commit yourself to such absolute statements. And then on the river, I agree with you that it's a really low fold equity spot now. I think villain primarily just has ace x here. And if they are someone who called jacks on the turn, they're probably a bit stationary and are kind of likely to sometimes call river with it as well. So there's definitely like a pool filtering thing going on there where the people that have called turn with jacks might also station river, and usually they do just have ace x here in slow plays for the most part. I don't rate your river fold equity at all. Do I prefer betting turn to checking turn? Do I like turning this into a bluff? I think it's pretty unclear with nines, and I might actually favour checking. I think if you had 7s or 8s though, then I can fully get behind this. Yeah, I'm just a little bit less sure than you are that they don't have an ace on this node, though. If your hand reading was right and they mainly just had, you know, queens, jacks, tens and stuff like that, then your play would be absolutely fine. I think you've just been a little too assumptive with like how often they'll have an ace here. So I think I'd maybe just like stick to the fundamentals of bluffing with slightly less showdown value than this. If it was early position, I think nines is actually probably okay. But in these positions, I think it's doing a little bit too well as a check, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, definitely.
I really like your the fact that that occurred to you, I really, really like that, because a lot of people don't look for those exploits, and I think it's reasonable, at least to consider that.
Yeah, I think other than maybe other suited Broadway, sorry, what's the 9 time ago? That I'm going to call that 3-bet with. It's going to be quite a bit of ace-x, then suited Broadways, then pocket pairs, predominantly some suited connectors. You're going to have to find bluffs from somewhere, haven't you? Otherwise, it's just going to be
Yeah,
calling
I mean,
your
that,
good hands and folding.
sure, that's part of the theory. I think what really motivates me, though, is the idea that, like, it could just be, it could just be a bit overfolded. Like, if they are betting the ace too often, like not slow playing enough, getting here with too many combos like tens, 8, 7s, 9s themselves, stuff like this. I just wonder if 9s is still a bit too far up. But, like, yes, in theory, you do want to be asking what your bluff should be and finding them and understanding the needs of the spot. But in practice, I think it's like the amount of fold equity is the primary thing that's motivating me there, rather than making sure I fulfill a bluff quota or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That makes sense.
Okay, let's dive back in.
Yep, be opening the king 8. That's off. Again, fold to any 3-bet. Rest of the board. Yeah, I think I'm just going to check back this one. I'll be getting raised a fair amount if he knows what he's doing. He seems to be quite aggressive based on the 20 hands I played with him, pretty small sample. Definitely start betting now. I'll call a bet if he yeah, I'm happy to just call. It's smaller, I think I'd probably consider raising, but happy to just call. And depending on the size, so I've got a bluff catcher here. We'll have some ace-x, tiny bit. I think it'd go a bit bigger with if you had a flush. Do block the miss flush draw. Yeah, if we have 6, 7, 7, 8 diamonds does get there. Probably would get that big. Yeah, I think this is probably as close to a indifferent call. Other side, I think. Ace Jack. Fair enough.
Okay, so a bit of coaching on like how to play a c-bet strat here, just to solidify it a little bit. I'm a bit concerned that you're being too equity driven when you're building your c-bet strategy, which I think can be a bit of a bad habit. And I think it's worth understanding that even if we are dropping down our frequency of betting with our range here, that we're not doing that in a totally linear way, and we're still going to have some hands with limited showdown value with a bit of redraw potential, like king 8 of clubs, that want to c-bet. So I guess this hand actually c-bets at higher frequency than the average hand in your range does, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying it's a mistake to check per se, but you're going to end up playing a very equity driven linear strategy. If you check king 8 here, you do want to be finding bluffs with like jack 7 backdoor and hands like this. Anything that's got a card around the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sort of backdoor straight draw region and doesn't have a ton of showdown is fine to c-bet with. I also think the other thing you're doing on the flop that you can work on is you're scanning over a tiny HUD sample, but not thinking about like global population. Globally, population under raises the flop at these stakes, and there's not enough evidence to then say this player is going to raise me a lot. So you're kind of jumping too quickly to a HUD read there without spending enough time on the overall population read. I think that's the coaching for that spot.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Fair enough, yeah. Makes sense, yeah.
Okay, on the turn, I agree with Call. I think it's fine. You have a ton of showdown value. You've got redraw. Definitely fine. If villain had checked there, I do think you can do some betting with that hand. I don't think it's quite too far up for it, but you can also check. And then on the river, villain blocks. And yeah, I think it's a pretty standard call. It's going to be close in EV probably. Like, it's not going to be like hugely winning, but it is just very, very easy to overbluff if you're using, first off, if you just have an unfiltered range, right? Like, his range hasn't been filtered by your flop action, and it's possible that they've led turn with something random at some frequency if they're recreational. And then for this sizing, you need to win 20% of the time, so 80% of their range needs to be better than king 8 now. And that's asking a lot of like a random at these stakes. So I would not fold here. I do think it's winning to call, although not massively. And you are just going to run into that obvious ace-x hand very frequently here. It is going to happen, but that doesn't mean that call isn't okay at 4-1. So it's always worth reminding yourself that even though it feels grim and it feels like you're usually losing, poker's not asking much of you in this spot for you to flick it in.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Yep, and I wouldn't consider raising with a hand like this, probably. I do agree that they don't have many flushes, but how credible is it that you do? Like, not massively, and I think call's likely just better than raise here.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree.
Cool.
Ray's happy to potentially 4-bet this. I don't have much on him. I don't think he's been finding as many 3-bet bluffs as what he would have to make King Jack work better as a 4-bet, so I'm happy to just call. Happy to. I'm going to check raise this. Start folding out some definitely under pairs. Looking to go to the smaller size, but also going to be obviously building a pot with this page.
Yeah, so the only thing here I would coach you on is that you're talking about villain's range as if it's a polarized range, right? We were saying I don't think they'll have enough bluffs. I think a lot of people play 3-bet or fold, and when they're playing a linear range, it'll be harder for them to like quote unquote under bluff or be too strong. That said, I do think people are a little bit too strong here, maybe. But I don't know that I would say that that flatting and 4-betting are. I don't know if I can distinguish between them still. I think it's close. I don't mind 4-betting at all here. I do think if it's a weaker player though, and it could be, flatting's probably better because against the weaker player, they're likely to over continue. Hands that dominate this, like ace queen off, and okay, it doesn't dominate it, but ace jack off, let's say, to the 4-bet. So I think against like an out and out fish or whale or something, 4-betting's not so great here. But I think against most of the pool, it's totally fine. So we call, and I like the check raise on the flop. I think it's okay. You can check call or check raise his hand. Again, I'm not seeing a huge difference in AV between those lines. I always like scan, check in with myself, ask if one line is likely to be a lot better than the other. And I think like what you could work on, Joe, and this isn't like to say you made a mistake here, but you could just start to like ask yourself if more than one line is okay. Because I feel like you've got a tendency to make an insufficient argument for a line and then always pick that line. And you're not picking a bad line, there's no issue with it, but it might just be cool to say, it's kind of sanitizing for your game to say calling and raising both strike me as okay here, and just admit that the one you're doing is actually just being taken somewhat arbitrarily and randomly, and that it's not that you think it's way better than the other option. Just to sort of sanitize your game. You don't always have to say, like, it's not always the case that one line is going to be tons better than another or anything like that. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a preference towards one line than another.
Yeah, I feel like you actually don't have a preference, but you feel like you need to have a preference, and then you make up a reason to like pick a line that's not sufficient. And you don't have to do that. You can just live with the, they're too close to call, I'll just do this. That's okay. As long as you're not doing that as a cop out in spots where one line is a lot better and you're not trying to figure it out or something, right? That would be the danger. You could go too far in the other direction, ostensibly.
Yeah, I'll happy to fold call 5s against the big blind open. I don't think this one big blind open is strength pretty much ever. So there will be some. I think it's more likely to be like 9x, potentially 6x. Both short stacks, I think I'm happy to just call. Happily raise now. I think we're thinking a lot of his range is 9x, 6x. He's probably going to call. Should I even beat 7-8 if he was leading? But I don't think he'd be leading for one big blind. Again, happy with just a small raising position.
We cold call, which I think is fine, actually, like in it to win it, soft looking table, no problem with this at all for
Yeah,
min.
two short stacks. But yeah,
Mhm.
round as well. I think if they both were full stacks, I'd probably move towards more three bet or fold. But I'm
Mhm.
happy to just call when there's two short stacks.
Yeah. So your argument for not raising the flop was that they're both short, so the eventual amount of money that you want to put in, let's say it's not necessary to build the pot massively now, given that they only have like 40, 50 big blind stacks, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Okay, so my criticism here then is that it's not just about how much money we want in by the end. It's not just about that so called investment ceiling, but it's also about the mode and urgency of that investment. So if this board was ace, ace, eight, and you had ace 10, I'd be pretty happy to say if you're coolering an ace, you're probably going to get it all anyway. And I don't mind like slow playing that spot. But when the board is 9-5-6 two tone, I think it comes back to this idea of like sounds like a primitive thought process actually, but like action killing runouts, right? Because right now you're in a dream spot where it's likely going to
Yeah,
be underfolded by your opponents as a combined unit because there's so many hands that are enticing to bet call here. There are loads of draws that will call now but won't invest if they brick. There are loads of made hands that will call now but won't invest if it comes flush or straight. So there are so many runouts here that don't just hurt fives, but they make it like impossible to value bet fives, that you absolutely must raise this flop. And it comes down to the textural type of urgency rather than the SBR type of urgency. So if you imagine it, there's a few different types of urgency. Have you done Carrot Poker School, Joe, just to remind me?
no, it's not.
Right,
Not
okay.
yet.
So it's one of the terms in there is like how urgent is it that I value raise? And that can be a function of, stack depth and stuff like that, but it can also just be a function of texture and how you want to get the money in and how soon. So definitely want you raising, against like if this had been checked you would not have checked, right?
No, yeah,
And it's
absolutely not.
such a small bet that you can almost treat it like most of the way
Effectively a check,
towards a
isn't it?
check.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the same thing where you just need to make sure pot grows sooner rather than later, even though I do agree that you could get in $12 here by calling and then just going big and then really big. You could do, but you don't want to do it that slowly on a board like
Okay.
this where your
Yeah, that
opponents
makes
are
sense.
merged and over defending and just like it's a dream spot. Take it now.
Definitely makes sense. Gonna be ISO near. I'd probably go 5.5 if he had a full set. Just go 4.5 with his 40 big blind stack. I think he's kind of it's quite a polarizing flop for him. He's going to limp some ace offsuit. I quite see quite a lot of people limping offsuit aces or a lot of like mediocre queen jack sort of hands around that region. So happy to just check call with the kings. Again, the SPR is so low that I don't think we need to be check shoving when he's just going to call with ace and fold everything else in. Again, I think the same. I think he's
Yeah, so really, really good check. I think I've seen people lazily bet small in this spot. Many students do this, and it's really kind of bad because against the recreational with a really random air-filled range, I actually like the fact that you noted that they're more polar on a board like this than normal because like all of their crappy ace high just suddenly makes top pair and all of the nothing is really, really bad on this board, right? It's like drawing dead almost against your kings. So they're very, very polar compared to your hand. They either crush you or they're crushed by you. And when that's the case, protection and useful fold equity is not really a thing. And so checking and giving maximum amount of, room for them to do something silly is definitely just better, I think, than betting here. So really, really like the check call. I think the half pot bet can be almost anything on flop. On turn, definitely wouldn't raise. There's, you just have a medium strength hand. They're going to have a weak ace a lot. That doesn't mean there's fold equity if you try and start bluffing here and you can't value raise. So yeah, I think you played this hand perfectly. I just wanted to make that point about flop and how key it is to actually check there and not lazily bet small or something.
yeah, that doesn't make sense. I think you said, it's either they've got me beat or they're just going to fold, so there's not really much point in betting.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so
Not really any point in betting.
yeah, well, it's not just that there's no point in betting, but it's actually just like really profitable to let them spew the bottom of their range, and that's a lot of combos that you're crushing. So I would actually be hungrier there and get to the real point, which is like I want them investing with as many terrible hands as possible. How do I do that? Given that I don't want to make them fold anything. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely makes sense.
So my overall analysis of your game is that it's about 1 out of 10. No, I'm just kidding. It's not so bad at all for the stake you're playing. I think you just need to work on having more of a baseline of what you're doing, right? So like my toolkit here is to use this sort of sizing, and this hand fits into it in this way. And it's also okay to acknowledge like, okay, in theory, if you're working with GTO Wizard or you're working with like Pio Solver or something, and you're seeing hands that commonly mix, it's okay to start out by saying like, okay, both these lines are okay here. You know, I could bet small, I could check, whatever, in some spot, and then look for an exploitative reason to take one over the other, by all means. But if you don't see one, don't feel like you have to like invent something to justify a play. You can just take a play because it's one of two good options. Like that's all right. And then I would say pay attention to urgency, really thinking about how you want money to go in, what's the best mode of investment. And it's just such a contrast between a hand like this, where the best mode of investment is check call and let the opponent bet absolutely dead hands, compared to the spot where one recreational leads, another one calls. It's a soaking wet board, and the best mode of investment is to make a big raise and get them to call hands that are way behind while they're doing that. So mode of investment is the other thing that I think is really relevant that came up today, and urgency. How has today left you feeling? Anything you want to ask me before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think. Yeah, I think they're definitely obviously very valid points. I think I do think I probably would have raised that fives hand if I wasn't conscious of someone watching. It's quite a terrifying
I know.
experience this for thingy, but yeah, I definitely agree. It's not done much on urgency and how board texture affect urgency, so I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah, cool. It's one of those things that once you start thinking about it, it's probably really obvious. But when people say to me like, if I wasn't being watched, I would have done X better, I totally sympathize, because I was in that situation when I did the sweat with Bennett Badbeat on his channel, and I made a silly mistake that I would normally make as well. But it did show me that I didn't understand that spot as concretely as I thought, because if I understand something really concretely, I make a mistake close to never, right? Like if I'm watching you, you're not going to open Jack Deuce in the hijack because I'm watching you, right? That's not a thing. So it just means that like you don't have the fives raised down as well as you have not raising Jack Deuce in the hijack down, and you want to have both of those to equal levels of certainty actually, like pretty soon. So yeah, it can point out where we know stuff, but it's only in our sort of conscious competence. It's not yet ingrained in our subconscious competence, so it can be a good way of pointing those things out coming on a show like Inferno. There we go. We had to do a really angry, fiery one at the end. All right, Joe, you've been a great contestant. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and best of luck to you in the rest of your poker journey. Stay tuned, guys, for more episodes of Poker Inferno. And don't forget, the golden carrot is now a product on Carrot Corner. You want to dip your toes into the carrot waters for the first time. You get everything on site, and permanent lifelong access to the subscription service and anything new we put out by getting the golden carrot. Check out Carrot Corner. We'll see you soon for another video. Bye for now.